Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar hosted by Second Nature, Bridging Academics and Communities, Advancing Climate Action Through University Local Partnerships. And I'm Crystal Chisel on the Second Nature staff, along with my colleague, Cami Sakal, as your host for today. And I'm pleased to introduce our guest presenter for today, Gavin Luter, who is managing director of EPIC-N, which is a nonprofit association dedicated to uniting the human capital of universities with local governments and communities to improve the quality of life and social wealth for all involved. And here's just a brief and abbreviated list of some of Gavin's career highlights. So he holds a PhD in educational administration from the University of Buffalo and a Master of Science in Higher Education Administration from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, as well as a BA from Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University in public and nonprofit management. So before joining EPIC-N, Gavin served as the executive director of Wisconsin Campus Compact. He has published several peer-reviewed articles on community, school, university partnerships. He served as education planning director of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's Choice Neighborhood Initiative, where he worked to secure over $16 million in commitments from 14 different philanthropic and higher education partners to create a neighborhood-linked education system. And at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville's Howard Baker Jr. Center for Public Policy, he developed and coordinated an undergraduate living learning community experience for students interested in public service and civic engagement. So welcome, Gavin. Very happy to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Crystal, and thanks, Cami. And it's lovely to be here. Very happy to be working alongside Second Nature. I may have met some of you at the Second Nature conference in DC. So I just wanted to say hello again and invite you all into the conversation. I already see some Q&A is coming through, and hopefully we can address some of those questions as we go forward. I'll first start by talking about EPIC-N and what exactly it is. It stands for Educational Partnerships for Innovation and Communities Network. Funny enough, we're a nonprofit organization that technically is incorporated in Madison, Wisconsin, and many of you all may get your medical information through MyChart, which is run by Epic Systems. We are not the same Epic, just in case you're curious. We are instead a network of universities and colleges who are trying to link ourselves and our capital with the needs of local government, so cities, counties, towns, and villages. So you could find our contact information there and our website. Check us out, but I'll talk a lot more about what we do. Let's first think about what kind of animated us to ask the question of how we can better do this work. So universities, we know, are places that have a lot of capacity. In particular, we have a lot of students doing work in classes that are usually simulated, hypothetical, or kind of, fake projects that they're working on to be able to learn things. A lot of faculty who are very smart and want to do good by the world. We have a lot of new knowledge. We're developing new knowledge. We're kind of in the business of developing new knowledge, and we're constantly trying to figure out what is the best way to innovate. And as we look at the other side of the coin, cities and local governments generally are kind of constrained in their capacity. They don't always have the human capital that they need to be able to do things, which is one of the reasons why they look a lot at consultants to do work. They're not necessarily inherently, seeking new knowledge because they're usually putting out fires, trying to respond to the needs of residents in real time. And they are not really incentivized to take risks because they want to keep the trains running on time. They want to make sure that they have the basic needs covered. So that is one thing that we realized. Then you also got to look at the numbers that we looked at. In the world, there are over 35,000 credentialed universities and colleges. In the United States alone, there are about 4,000. There are 250 million plus students in universities and colleges enrolled worldwide, about just over 19 million here in the United States. And in the United States, there are 90,000 plus local governments. If anyone's curious, Illinois has the most local governments, at just over 4,500 local governments in the state of Illinois. The next is Texas. Um, but there are over 3,000 county governments, 35,000 townships and municipalities, over 12,000 school districts, and almost 40,000 other special purpose local governments, such as lake districts, transit authorities, transit districts, and those kinds of things. Maybe even COGS, coalition of governments. And usually when you talk about university community engagement, you usually think about universities connecting with nonprofit organizations, not necessarily local government. So given that the complexity of running cities continues to increase, we've seen federal and state, can we call it gridlock? Maybe at the worst, dysfunction. At the end of the day, cities and local governments still have to deliver services, and they need help in doing that, usually, is what we find. So it led us to ask this question: what if we could connect existing instructors at universities, existing courses that they're already teaching, with existing projects that local governments said that they wanted help with already, documented through their comprehensive or strategic plans, at a scale that magnifies value for all? And that's what kind of led us to create Epic N. We do have actually a global network of universities and colleges. We have a network in Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Caribbean, in the United States. And we do have about 100 member programs. What we are trying to get universities and colleges to do is to start an initiative that intentionally goes out and asks local governments, hey, what kinds of things do you need help with? And they list things that they already have identified. And then you go back to the university and find people who teach courses who roughly kind of align with what those projects are. And you ask an existing instructor, hey, do you think that you might be able to deliver some kind of thing that resembles what this local government is looking for? And if they say, yeah, then you sit down and you kind of broker a conversation with them. So it is a program to do that. And then whatever the students create in the courses, that is what the deliverable is that is produced for local governments. And then you kind of go on and say, are there other ways that we can help? We have about 40 or 50 university programs in the United States, but we do have programs around the world. As I mentioned to you, you can check out who is a part of our network. But if you're thinking about the kinds of universities that are involved with the university or the Epic N program in the United States, just to name a few members: University of Maryland, University of South Florida, Augustana College, University of St. Thomas, Texas A&M University, University of Washington, University of Oregon, CSU, Monterey Bay. So a variety of types of institutions. We don't have any technical or community colleges yet, but we are figured out how to get there. So all different kinds of institutions. Admittedly, we probably have more of a bias toward large research intensive universities. Let me tell you a little bit about the basics of the EPIC model that we say. So you try to take existing courses. We know that universities and colleges are constrained. We know that trying to ask them to do new things, create new courses, create new research agendas, that's difficult. But you can take existing courses that are already being taught with existing local government identified projects. As I'd mentioned to you, every local government is statutorily usually mandated to have a comprehensive or a strategic plan that articulates what their priorities are, and usually they cannot accomplish them on their own. So the good news is that that work of defining the projects has already kind of been done a little bit in the local government space. We also say that we want to have partnerships that are documented through contracts and MOUs. This is something that I think makes the Epic N model particularly unique, because if you're looking for a way to start an initiative, the question always comes up: how do you fund it? And Epic N universities and colleges in the United States typically actually charge local governments to go through this process. I like to say that you're actually charging for the concierge service of coming into one place, saying, hey, how do I get to the right people on campus? And then that person on campus gets me to the right people, instead of me being frustrated and knocking at 30 some doors at a university, which I can do, but it just takes up a lot of time. And finding the right person is almost feeling like you're finding a needle in a haystack. So you actually have written, documented contracts and MOUs, all of which we have at the Epic Network documented, and we can help you kind of get there. I, as you intentionally aim at improving quality of life. I forgot. Sorry, I forgot my SDG slide here. What we try to say is that the intentional aim at quality of life means that you are kind of using the United Nations SDGs, which, at least for now, every member state in the United Nations has agreed to the UN SDGs as kind of a nice way to think about how to improve humanity overall. Usually these are countrywide goals, but there's an effort to figure out how can these national or federal governments actually localize these sustainable development goals. Think of the SDGs as kind of a loose garment that we run other projects through. If somebody wants to say we want to increase gentrification and displace poor people in our community, we're going to say, well, it's not really in line with the SDGs. But almost every other socially good project you can probably imagine falls within the framework of the UN SDGs. If you're not as familiar with that, I can certainly talk more about those goals. C is community identified, community driven, community evaluated. One of the questions that I think we got beforehand was, what are the essential things that faculty need to do in order to be successful at university community partnerships? Well, it turns out that one of the things that faculty can do is show up not with an agenda, show up saying, how can we help? And might we be able to link some of the things that you need help with our existing things on our campus? It may not be exactly what you want to work on as a faculty, but through coursework, you have a little bit more flexibility. So we try to say community identified, community driven, community evaluated. We also do offer frameworks for evaluating your projects and partnerships. So we have that all at the ready to help you kind of get started. And then N is the numbers, bringing the full power of the university to local governments. This is sometimes, I think, where people get stuck, and they think, oh, like I, as an individual faculty member, I have something that might be able to help. But there are a bunch of other schools, colleges, and departments that can also help. So how do you bring the full power of the university to local governments? And I'll talk more about that later. But yeah, just so you know that these are kind of the 5 core tenets of the EPIC model. And we think that they're kind of a loose garment that you can wear to bring in these projects and create some kind of consistency. Another question that we got submitted beforehand is, what are the best practices in faculty doing this work? And one of the things that consistently we found throughout the years is that university community partnerships are difficult to maintain because they're kind of one-off and they exist between one faculty member and one community partner. But if you actually create an initiative like this that brings in community partners through a pipeline, they get connected, but they have one point of contact, like a relationship manager at the university, to kind of help them navigate through the complexity of the university. That's definitely a best practice that we have identified. So this is not just hypothetical. It actually works. We have done 2,000 SDG promoting projects in over 400 communities worldwide. People have told us that the median return on investment that they get is about 500% in the sense of what they invest in the program. They're getting 500% time back for that. Admittedly, I don't want to I don't want people to think that we're over promising here. We realize that these are student deliverables and students aren't going to be able to do everything that local governments want to do. But you can check on our project library, on our individual program websites, and see what the actual deliverables are, so that you can get a sense of what is being done. David Ward, who used to be the president of the American Council on Education and twice the chancellor of UW-Madison, called this the easiest adopted and most efficient model I've seen for ensuring real and visible faculty and student contribution of value to area communities while also improving student learning at the same time. I think it is important for you all to realize that EPIGAN actually has deep roots in sustainability and environment. Because one of the first initiatives that started the EPIC model was the University of Oregon's Sustainable City Year Program, or SCYP. If anybody's interested in looking that up, that's one of our first EPIC programs, as well as the Iowa Initiative for Sustainable Communities. And it was started because these local governments wanted to make progress on sustainability and climate goals or climate action goals, and they didn't know how to do it. They wanted to get the university and their forward thinking students and faculty to come help them address those issues and concerns that they had around sustainability and climate resilience. So this program started because local governments had so many questions around sustainability, but it has since expanded to universities being able to work on all kinds of issues for local government. So our motto in EPIGAN is just start, don't overthink it. It is pretty easy to get something like this up and running at your university. So if you find a catalyst or a champion, maybe that's you on your campus. You individually are interested in this. Finding somebody to run the program in the interim. In some cases, this could be a faculty. If you have like a Center for Community Engagement or a Center for a Sustainability Office or something like that, this could be something that someone could dedicate some of their time to while you're proofing the concept. Ask other faculty, do you want to get involved? Finding a community partner. I know this is something that a lot of people have questions about, like how do I exactly find a community partner? If you think about not just starting in your own hometown, which I'll talk about this later, there are a lot of other local governments who might be a short drive away or might be a long drive away, and they want to get more involved in the university, but they're not adjacent to the university, so they have a little harder time connecting with them. Usually, if you show up to local government conferences or you show up to village hall or city hall or town hall, or the county office building or something, or you attend a meeting of a city county or a village board meeting or a county board meeting, and you just introduce yourself as, hi, I'm so-and-so professor, and I'm looking at ways that we might be able to help partner with your university or with your local government. Usually people find people like that. But inevitably, there are probably people on your campus who already have connections with local governments. And so the good thing is that you could probably take advantage of some of them. Scope projects and partnerships. You just have to find a couple of projects that you think could be really good fits for individual courses on your campus. Finding funding for the pilot year could be the local government itself. Some of our universities and colleges have actually told us that alumni have stepped up to support their pilot, or a local foundation. In some cases, actually, our partnerships got started because people were just in kind given their time by a dean or something like that who saw the possibilities to get things off the ground and try to find your first contract. And then become an EPIC member. And just, no snake oil salesman here. It does not cost anything to join the EPIC network. You are welcome to come in, sign up for an account for free, join our network, and we have, communities of practice. We also have, regular program monthly calls with other program people and faculty and staff. We have conferences, we have webinars and those kinds of things. And this is why I'm hoping that we might be able to partner with Second Nature even more to provide some of these things that are in line with the kinds of projects that your people are interested in. As I mentioned, please go on our website and check out the project library so you can get a sense of who's working with us and what projects they've worked on. I'll just mention a couple of projects that I think might be of interest to you all. University of Oregon wanted to do a project around industrial waste streams. We're not aligned to local waste systems, and didn't really understand the byproducts of that. They worked with communications students, business administration, business analytics students, and I think some of them actually had a focus in sustainability. And they did byproduct and waste mapping that resulted in strategic upgrades to a biomass facility that helped them save and make actually about $800,000 annually. We had a project at the University of Zambia who was looking at informal settlements. Some people might call them slums, but it's more of a trend to call them informal settlements, wanting to look at improving critical infrastructure, and worked with GIS and survey and communication students, and helped improve their service schedules for better waste management practices to improve the sustainability of these areas. I've put a couple of examples up here. I'm not sure if I had mentioned this, but I've recently become the full-time managing director of EpicN. I've been part-time managing director for almost the last 2 years. And I just left my job at University of Wisconsin running a program, an EPIC program at the University of Wisconsin called the University Alliance. And I just wanted to put up a few of the more recent projects that we had worked on. Sustainability best practices. We had a village that wanted to do some more work around sustainability, and they said, we just don't know what we could be doing. Tell us what the literature says we could be doing. Look at what we have, what we could be working with. And we had a couple of students work on that. We also had some energy audits where a sustainable systems engineering capstone worked on that. A master's student in urban planning looked at phosphorus reduction and sustainable development in a community that wanted to grow, but they didn't want to destroy the environment at the same time, which was a laudable goal. And then, we actually had a geography class work on developed marketing materials for an airport that wanted to promote their sustainability practices to help the people who are using that airport know that they are contributing to sustainability practices. So these are just a couple of examples of projects. I wanted to also put out there is if you're able to at the university, finding ways that your climate action strategies or anything like that can be aligned better with your city. This could be a nice way to make a good connection with your hometown. This is an example from the University of Wisconsin. It has a net zero emissions goal by 2048. And they are aligning their goals with the local city and the state's efforts. So I think that was a really good kind of nod of the hat. It helped them build a relationship with the city to say, hey, we're in the city. We want to build a better relationship with you. And how can we align our plans with what you do at the city? So that's one recommendation that I would have there. I also just wanted to put out there that your typical allies that might want to work on sustainability projects may not be in your typical places that you might think. At the University of Wisconsin-Madison, we have worked with all of these places listed here on sustainability related projects. We even had somebody in education want to do some sustainability curriculum for a K-12 school. Somebody in public health wanted to do work on environmental sustainability and awareness and public awareness campaigns. We had questions, legal questions about what they actually could do. Engineering, psychology, sociology, business, journalism and communications. These are all places. So sometimes I think that sustainability faculty, staff, and students get a little can sometimes get a little siloed on our campus anyway at the University of Wisconsin. And so I think having them join a broader network of people on campus who are interested in connecting with cities could really be helpful. So I put this up here to say that our EpicN program actually got started before we even knew what EpicN was. We created an advisory board of people all across campus who wanted to make cities better. They weren't just interested in sustainability issues, although several people in our network were interested in sustainability issues. But where around campus where you actually see computer science sitting next to education, sitting next to the public affairs school, sitting next to extension, and sitting next to the law school. It's very rare on our large, very siloed college campuses. You actually find people who are talking across departments, schools, colleges, but we try to create that the University Alliance. So maybe this just sparks your interest in being able to create an advisory board of people who care about sustainability broadly or who care about working with cities. I think the broader you can make the idea, the better. And in this case, we wanted to connect with cities. And there are so many different, people around campus who want to work with cities that it was kind of broad enough appeal. And then when we found the EPIC model, we were able to find a network of people on campus who already wanted to fight for us, and they actually helped us raise some money to find a way that we could start this new initiative. I just wanted to let you all know that EPIC End programs vary. I put Cal State Monterey Bay because this is one of my favorite examples of it's an individual faculty member. You can see it's Dan Fernandez. I don't know if Dan is on here, but um, this is out of the Fernandez Lab, the Sustainable City Year program at CSU Monterey Bay. It's a relatively modest in scale, maybe 10 or 11 projects per year in 3 to 6 classes. But it's actually run by an individual faculty member who just loves working with cities and wants to make his courses connected with cities, and sometimes asks his colleagues to work on projects with him on these cities. Augustana College, this is based at the Upper Mississippi Center. And so this is about improving quality of life overall in the Upper Mississippi region. And this is a small private liberal arts school. We also have a program like Arizona State University. They have created a whole new office, ASU Project Cities. It's in their Global Futures Lab. And it basically does the EPIC model, and it is embedded in their broader Global Futures Lab. And then the University of Maryland, their Partners for Action Learning and Sustainability is actually based at the National Center for Smart Growth at the University of Maryland. So it can take a bunch of different forms, and what you want to try to do is find aligned partners to link up with, and we found that that's very helpful, and they might not always be in places that you think they will be. My recommendations for everybody on the call is, just start an EPIC program. Don't think too much about it. Start reaching out to local governments tomorrow. And you can do this. You can join the EPIC network. You can reach out to your local governments around you, but not just your hometown. I think driving 15 to 30 minutes outside and finding outer ring suburbs or places that have typically been underserved or places that are in rural communities. I saw some questions come in before we started about like, how do we, adjust our language to work with more, people who are more conservative or in outlying areas or rural areas. Me personally, when I go and work with some of these rural areas, which by the way, we've worked with many areas that you might not think would be friendly to welcoming the University of Wisconsin-Madison, but actually turn out to be quite friendly to working with us. It's quite a difference when you show up and you just ask what you need. And one of the counties, a little bit more of red territory, they wanted help updating their climate mitigation, their disaster management plan. And one of our faculty wanted to work on intentionally putting climate change in there. And they said, nope, that's not going to fly with our county board. We just need to talk about dealing with extreme weather events. And to me, I think if you, instead of saying climate action, and you instead start thinking about sustainability or thriving communities, or there's a colleague of mine at the University of Wisconsin that uses the term high road, which is to say not treating the earth like a sewer, not making government something that we make fun of, and using people as positive forces of development or modes of production. That is high road development. You can use all kinds of words that are not just around climate mitigation or climate adaptation. And these communities, the EPIC End program, I think, or the EPIC model, is a perfect way to be connecting with rural areas that might not typically, you would think, would be welcoming and working with universities. But if we can, be willing to get outside of our comfort zones of not just working in our backyards, I think you can get a lot of benefit there. Talk to your colleagues on campus and find your allies who cares about local government, who cares about sustainability. More allies on campus is, I think, what's going to make this successful. I put a couple of slides in here that were just around, like, if anyone is like, yeah, this sounds great, but like, why would I care about doing engaged learning projects or community-based learning projects? It turns out that there's actually quite a literature out there about how employers actually believe that active learning or kind of project-based learning is the best way, is the thing that they want universities and colleges to be doing. This is employers, private, public, and nonprofit sector. 60% of them think that students should be expected to complete a significant applied learning project. 88% thinks it's important to ensure that all students are prepared with the skills and knowledge needed to complete an applied learning project. Why? Because every time we work on a real world project in like outside of academia, that is an applied learning project. If we can make that happen in the university sooner, the better prepared that they're going to be later. Um, when you ask employers, what do you think actually is good evidence of skills and knowledge, like if they actually have a supervised internship or a community-based project, they're a lot more welcoming of that, as opposed to just like tests that we do, typical assessments that we do, even more effective than portfolios. The kinds of learning outcomes that employers seem to want the most. Critical thinking, complex problems, effectively communicating orally, applying knowledge to real world settings, teamwork. Those are the kinds of things that are most often taught through community-based learning. Especially, ethical judgment and integrity, comfortable working with colleagues, customers, or clients from diverse backgrounds. Those are the kinds of things that students can get in working in these local government partnerships. I just think that's a good thing to be doing. Maybe you all are already the choir, and I don't need to be preaching to the choir, but some of you might be on the fence about like, I'm not really sure if engaged learning or community-based learning or project-based learning is for me. Well, I would say that you should consider doing it. And also there are people out there who can kind of help you with that, especially if you have a Center for Community Engagement on your campus, partnering with them, maybe just begin with, and they can help you understand more of those best practices and how to make things go well. So I'm stopping sharing here because I want this to be more Q&A as opposed to me just talking, and I've already talked for about 30 minutes. So Cami, I see that you just came off camera. We have some questions in the chat here.
Yeah, thanks so much, Gavin. That was really helpful. And I think the biggest thing that I really enjoyed was the connection to the city strategic plans and what's kind of already laid out, and like embedding yourself in that versus having this is a project we want to do or we think we want to do and going to them. So I think that's a really helpful connection point. So we'll start, because I think you did answer quite a few of the questions in registration, and we have a lot in the Q&A section. So we'll just start there. And there's in some of these, there's 3 questions in one, so we'll see how many we can get through. The first one, and I'll just do all 3, and you can take whichever one you feel most equipped for. What are the most successful models of collaboration between universities and local governments? How do these partnerships ensure long-term impact rather than short-term projects? And then what are the biggest barriers to effective university local climate partnerships, and how do we overcome them?
Yeah, happy. I think the most successful model that I know of collaboration between universities and local governments is the EPIC model. I mean, to be honest, I had a really hard time explaining to my family what I did as a job as a community engagement professional. But then when I started working with the EPIC model, my mom was like, so what do you do again? I was like, oh, I connect cities and their projects with courses. And she was like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. And it really does make a lot of sense. And the fact that it's not happening more often is kind of disheartening. So that's what the EPIC model is trying to do. So I don't know of any, there is the Metro Lab network out there that is trying to specifically partner up universities and local governments on like tech transfer initiatives or smart cities stuff. There's also the US Ignite stuff, but again, that's really driven by research projects and usually smart city stuff, and that's usually only with their hometown or their home city. So there are some other frameworks and models to connect local governments with universities, but this is the most straightforward one that I know of, number one, and it's also the only one that tries to address existing infrastructure at universities and not just creating new research projects. I think new research projects actually come from these relationships that you develop through courses. And they're like, wow, you did a great job. We loved working with you. Now, like the university professor might say, I actually have a separate idea for another research project. Would you be open to hearing about that? And once you've actually done something for them, they're willing be engaging with you. To me, I think that is one of the answers to how do you ensure long-term impact rather than short-term projects. But I think like there's definitely a desire in our field of community engagement to do long-term projects. But let me tell you, sometimes local governments just want something done transactionally. I need this thing. I've got to apply for this grant. Can you do it for me? And then we're done. And there's been some times where we're like, hey, how do we do a long-term impact? And they're like, you gave me exactly what I needed. Thank you. And we're moving on. Some people do want long-term projects and they want to get at long-term impacts. And we actually have some data that show, like, if you go back to communities in 5 years, maybe not all the projects, but some of the projects, um, as just one example, we did a South Winnequa Road redesign at the University of Wisconsin, and we went back 5 years later, and they're like, that led us to ask about like, how are we thinking about bike and pedestrian friendliness in all of our routes, not just South Winnequa Road. They created an ad hoc transportation committee, and then they started to create policy and designs later on that was we had no idea that we were affecting. So you never really know what impact like one project like getting them to think differently. I know this might sound like crazy, but one of our community partners was like, students kept asking us, what does the community think about this? And of course, we always think about what the community thinks about it, but we don't actually do a deep dive into like surveying and understanding. And the students really pushed us to do that. So that to me leads to long-term impact that came from these things. But I guess just the anonymous attendee who asked these questions, I will say that it's not always about, long term. It sometimes is an immediate need, but it's up to you to figure out like what the community partner actually wants to use the deliverable for. Because sometimes if they have their eye on a grant that they want to write, that could be a very long term impact. It's important for you to know that your students are working on a deliverable that will help them write that grant. So the deliverable needs to be oriented toward what that grant asks for or something like that. And then the biggest barriers to engaging in university local climate partnerships and how do we overcome them? To me, I think one of the biggest barriers is just the administrative bureaucracy that comes with working with the university. It's difficult to find out where to plug into. It's difficult to find out who to talk to, who can actually help me navigate the campus. There are lots of people on campuses who could be helping with climate partnerships, but it's like, who do you go to and who do I know who the right person to work on this is? But this is where if we can do a little bit of organizing ourselves on campuses, get the coalition of the willing together, and then bring these projects in, and I could be like, oh, I have a colleague in the School of Business, or I have a colleague in the School of Journalism who could kind of help us with this. I also think one of the biggest barriers is potentially funding. I mean, finding ways for local governments to support this work can be challenging, but we've had local governments be able to say, yeah, we might not be able to afford $100,000, but if we talk about $30,000 to $40,000, maybe we could write that into our budget over a 3-year period of time. Those kinds of things, that is a barrier. And then, of course, another barrier is faculty and student preparation. That is something that we have heard over and over and over again. The faculty are not equipped with skills of, some kind of basic project management, understanding how to communicate well. And even, I'm not saying all faculty don't have this, so please do not. I mean, I know we're recording and all this stuff, but please don't ever say that Gavin said that no faculty have humility. But there's occasional times when faculty think they know more than some of our community partners. And I think sometimes when these faculty can be like, hey, we have a lot to learn from you, like shifting that paradigm to say, we have a lot to learn from practitioners and we also have a lot to offer. So how can we make this work reciprocal? So just making sure that you're training faculty to know how to deal with those real world situations. Also, there are some times where community partners change their mind halfway through projects. And if faculty is like, no, I need this, it's like, well, it's maybe not going to work. But if you can find a way to be like, hey, students, this is a real world thing. Situations change. We need to be nimble. And I know that when you're a faculty member and you're trying to design a course, you don't want to hear about things changing in the middle. And that usually doesn't happen. But if it does happen, that's life. That's how it goes. But if we're so like inflexible, sometimes it can really be a detriment to the partnership. And then how do we also the student preparation? The students don't have some kind of understanding of how to be a good steward, a good communicator, professionally working in teams. that can also hurt things. But there are people on your campus, I'm almost positive, who have training programs that can help. And if you don't, then we at the Epic Network know how to connect you with those resources. So yeah, that's 3 questions. I try to answer them all.
That was great. Yeah, I think that you just speaking to how important you meeting them with their needs, as well as how important the just relationship is, right? And the foundations of the relationship of communication and trust, and just knowing that you're in it together in some ways. So, okay, another 3-parter for you. What metrics are used to evaluate whether a partnership is making a meaningful difference? How do we track policy changes or measure environmental improvements from university-led efforts? And are there case studies of successful, which you talked about this a little bit, of successful university local partnerships, but that actually lead to climate policy changes, which I think is a little bit further than what you guys do, but you might have some examples for that.
Yeah, the metrics question is a good one. I mean, I'm going to start with very basic. Like when I think about metrics of success, I think, is our partner happy? I know that you all are going to be like, wow, that's not really a helpful metric. But like if the community partner did not have a good experience working with the students, if they hated, this whole process, then it almost doesn't matter what the students put on the paper, then it's almost immediately going to be discounted. So if you're not tracking like partnership satisfaction, like partner satisfaction throughout the entire time, you're taking their temperature, coming in to ask about, hey, communication, is this working well? Are the students doing what you need them to do? Is this missing the mark? Those are all the kind of little things you need to be following throughout the partnerships, which hopefully, somebody on your campus or an Epic End program might be able to help pay a little bit more attention to that. There's also the big question about like metrics. The Sustainable Development Goals offer over 160 metrics that you can track progress. If the community partner is interested in tracking those metrics, you can put it out there to say, there are a lot of metrics that you can use to be able to track impacts. I mean, there are also like so many. I mean, Cami, I don't have enough time to go through all the different assessment and evaluation scales that are out there about tracking the effectiveness of partnerships in general, because it says whether the partnership is making an actual difference. But to me, I think if you're on top of knowing what your community partner wants and they're actually satisfied with what they're getting throughout the process, then that's a lot more likely to make a meaningful difference if they are. And tracking policy changes, that's something where I think this takes patience. The example that I was giving about the South Winnequa Road, and then that led to an ad hoc policy about assessing the pedestrian and bike friendliness of all the roads for in the future. We only learned that because we went back to them about 3 or 4 years after we engaged with them, and we did a thing called ripple effects mapping, which is an appreciative inquiry technique. If you don't know about it, just Google ripple effects mapping. The University of Minnesota Extension put it out there as a way to kind of evaluate the effectiveness of community coalitions. So ripple effects mapping is a good thing to do, and actually has community partners ask each other questions and then track like, oh, I learned that and I didn't know this beforehand, and then actually that conversation led to that conversation and all that stuff. And then you kind of map those things. And there are plenty of examples online of ripple effects mapping, and we have done that as a program. We also do evaluations for community partners, faculty, and students to kind of understand, are all of them getting something positive out of it? But to me, I think the metrics that I care more about is is the community partner getting their needs met? Students are going to learn. Students be learning. They're already learning. No matter what they do, even if they have a bad experience, they've learned about what that means to have a bad experience. But if the community partner is not getting what they want, to me, I think that's the ultimate metric. And are there case studies of successful university local government partnerships that have led to policy changes? Yes. There are. You can check out our case study stories on the Epic End website. I mean, but it depends on kind of what you mean by actual climate policy changes. I mean, the Outagamie, or sorry, not the Outagamie, the Appleton International Airport they wanted to find out ways that they could actually make it to their carbon neutrality goals as an airport, and they applied to work with us because they're partially county funded. And they are making progress. They have built buildings that have changed. They have, they're doing different things to achieve their goals. And like one of the things they wanted was like a microgrid. Could you help us design what a microgrid would be? How much would we use it? How long could it work for? Do you call that policy change? I don't know. I mean, I like to think that it's helping an airport make different decisions than it would have before. If you're talking about high hazard mitigation plans and you've actually made a change, or if you're talking about building a new, municipal facility, and you're finding different sustainable technologies, or you're trying to address blue-green algae blooms. I mean, I don't know what you think is policy change, but I know that there are a lot of administrative changes that are coming from the decisions that our students are helping guide these local governments towards. So that's how I would answer those.
Great. Okay. Next three-parter. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What role does EPIC-N play in guiding these partnerships? What common mistakes do universities and local governments make in these collaborations? And how can institutions replicate successful models from other regions, which you've kind of talked about that. So maybe the first two.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think EPIC-N does help guide the partnerships, and we can kind of help you figure out what you're doing if this is your first time or your second time. We also have a network of other universities and colleges who can kind of guide you through that process. So yeah, I mean that we can kind of help you get off the ground and show you many examples of ways that these partnerships have been guided for success in the past. So we can be there alongside with you as much as you want. As you get kind of on your feet, people need us less and less, and so we're always there as kind of a support network if you need us. To me, I think common mistakes that people make in these collaborations, like I said, I think not having super duper clarity on what the final deliverable is. That is a mistake that I see over and over again, because local governments, I know that they kind of know what they want, but sometimes they don't exactly know what they want. So it takes okay, I had a community partner who was like, I want a 50-year watershed conservation plan. It's like, okay, that's got to be broken up into a lot of different small pieces. And we ended up getting a water resources management class who did an 18-month experience with the whole master's program is built on a real world based problem solving thing. And they ended up putting all the pieces together, but we had a project on GIS mapping to understand the floodplains. We had, what do you do with excess water? We've had, how do you do more nature-based solutions for water draining? We had governance. We had a governance question. And so I think then understanding, okay, so you want to look at governance. What do you want to know about governance? What are you exactly looking for? Because sometimes the community partner might want one thing, but the students aren't actually able to deliver that thing. So faculty maybe not having as good of an understanding of what their students actually can or can't do. And sometimes you don't know that until your students get in the class. But then that scope needs to be revisited after the first week of class to be like, hey, I've got a group of students who are familiar with this technology, but they're not familiar with that particular data analysis technique. So we can only do this. Being truth in advertising, do not over promise. You under promise and over deliver every time. You tell people students can't do everything, they can only do this part. But I think there are some times where faculty are like, yeah, I think our students could do that, but they don't really know if they actually can. And then similarly, I think local governments change their minds. That's what I told you. That is a barrier when they change their minds midway through. I'm not going to mention the community, but one of our community partners wanted to do a study looking at the connection between cancer rates and PFAS levels. And they were a new person who came in the program after the original person who had decided what that project was. And they were like, I just heard the state epidemiologist basically just say that there's no connection, and I don't want to piss people off in my community. And so we had to scrap that project because it was too politically sensitive, and they did not want the state epidemiologist to come breathing down their neck to be like, why are you doing a study that just directly contradicted me? And this is, to me, I think this actually doesn't have anything to do with right or left. This is just about like, hey, the controversial topic, everybody's trying to understand this. That sometimes, like, if you're not clear on what exactly you want, I think that's a very common problem. Communications also, like, I've had students stop communicating with community partners. I have had faculty stop communicating with community partners, and I've had community partners stop communicating with the university. So like, if you don't have somebody who's like constantly following up throughout the semester, and not just like a, hey, I'm good, but like, tell me about how things are going. Because we've done the, is everything okay? And we get the yes, and turns out it's not really okay. They were just like, didn't want to tell us how badly it was going. So if you can get more details and triangulate that, don't just ask the community partner, or don't just ask the faculty, or don't just ask the students. You ask all three of them, and then you can get a better understanding. Anyway, so those are just a couple of common mistakes. I could certainly talk about more. And then, yeah, I think I've already answered that third one.
Yeah, I think just going back to the stronger the relationship is, probably the better the communication is also going to be between the three stakeholders. Okay, we're getting close to time, so I'm going to pull together two, one of them being a three-parter and then one of them being a question. So funding models, what funding models support university-led climate action projects? How can universities help local governments secure resilience funding? And then what are the most cost-effective ways to maximize university resources for community climate action? A little bit different than what you do, but you might have some answers to that. And then Delilah asked or said, I'd love to hear more about timeline challenges and solutions, specifically how to think through short-term commitments available for students in one class, et cetera, versus longer-term horizon of local government needs, which I think is a really great question. And then maybe lastly, how do you see the Trump administration affect work? So we're just going to wrap it all up.
The elephant in the room is that's the one
always
that
like
wondering.
In this moment in time, that is the elephant in the room. So we'll just whichever ones speak to you, and then we'll let everybody free for the rest of the afternoon.
I mean, I think I'll do a gentle pushback about the anonymous attendee who framed the question as what funding models support university-led climate action projects, and say what funding models support collaborative projects between local governments and universities. Because I think there's not as much funding out there just for university-led climate action projects, although Cami, you and Second Nature probably know a lot more about that than I do. But our funding model has been typically you find universities who want to do work on projects collaboratively with local governments, and then you do them together. And I think that is where, because the local governments may actually pipe up. The Department of Natural Resources, the Department of Health Services have been two big funders in the state of Wisconsin. I'm sure you have a lot of state funding agencies that can help with that. But I would say look collaboratively on projects that our local governments can own. Like there's some funding streams that only they can tap into. So if you're a partner and you're listening and they trust you, then you could be a part of that initiative. But university-based work to do climate adaptation, I'm going to put that in Cami's bailiwick, because I'm not as familiar with university. Like if it's a university-based project, like how do we get LEED certification on all of our buildings or something like that? That's not up my alley. How can universities help local governments secure climate resilience funding? To me, I think if you have a grant application and you have a strong partner from a university that's helping you develop innovative techniques, measure impacts, track things, and you're actually helping train the next generation of climate interested students, that's an attractive proposition for funders to know that they actually have a university partner with them. So I think that's how they, and at the end of the day, anonymous attendee, I would encourage you to just ask the question, hey, you want to do this work? You want to apply for a thing? How can we be helpful to you in getting this funding? Maybe it's a letter of support. Maybe it's somebody that you actually provide time in the grant to do that. Cost-effective ways to maximize universities for climate action. I mean, that, to me, I think that's the model. I don't have to pay faculty to do courses because they're already expected to do courses. I don't have to pay students to do these things. They're already doing them and they want to do a good job and they want something to add to their portfolio. So to me, I think you find a course that's already being taught, you find a local government who wants it taught, or who wants that thing, and you bring that together. And that seems to be pretty cost effective to me. I also, hold on, timeline challenges and solutions. I mean, don't be so held up by like, we can only do things over the semester. The idea of having an Epic End program means that you have somebody that can be with them throughout the course of the partnership. But if you just have a group working on something over one semester, that's okay. Then you can take what that group of students did and take it to the next group of students to work on a part 2 of the project. So as long as they have somebody that can be there as a continuous point of contact throughout the partnership, like that helps. We're not trying to change the calendar of universities. We just have to accept the fact that we have semesters to deal with, but don't get thinking that you can't do something meaningful within that semester. But the Epic End framework helps you think about how do you broaden that over a longer timeline. And then the Trump administration, as last I checked, the Trump administration really wants universities to do more, especially in rural areas. And to serve rural areas. And if we can go out and we could say, we have many, many documented experiences where these local governments are getting benefit from universities and their students doing work on behalf of public and community needs. I have had very serious discussions with Republicans in the state of Wisconsin about offering incentive funds for universities to do research and teaching that is dictated and guided by community priorities. To me, I think this is part of what the Trump administration hates about universities, is that they're cloistered unto themselves. They're only looking inward. They only do research that's, published in these academic journals. They only look at what the research gaps are. They're not as connected to like real world meaningful learning. They're not as responsive to what communities need. And so I think like if you're doing partnerships that are showing up and asking, how can we help? This to me is a perfect antidote to this declining public trust in higher education that, the Trump administration is just a manifestation of it. But the numbers, the Gallup polling is showing that trust in American higher education is going down among people on the right and the left. This is not just a people on the right thing. So do the EPIC model. And I think that's a good way to help.
Great. Thank you so much, Gavin. This was a really helpful conversation and just really thankful for your time. And Crystal, do you have anything to add?
I want to thank Gavin as well for such a full and interesting presentation. I think there was a lot for us to think about in your presentation. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.